Hello everyone, this is Charles Walter Buntjer coming to you from San Francisco. This video is going to be some of the highlights of my life. The first photo is when I was born on February 4th, 1940. The photo has my sister Yvonne, who was born in 1932 and is 8 years old. My mother, Edna, born in 1906, she was 34 years old, and of course, me. I was born in a small two-room house in northern Illinois, close to Polo. We were buying a 160-acre farm a mile away, and I was told by my sister, my father milked the cows, and about 8 o'clock at night, it was dark, he hitched a horse to a wagon, and he went up to the two-room house we were in. They bundled us up in blankets and went back down to the farm. And that was my first trip. We were only there a few months, and then we moved to a 500-acre farm near Pecatonica, Illinois. We rented the 160-acre farm to an aunt and an uncle. The 500-acre farm that we were renting was used to pay off completely the 160-acre farm and then build all new buildings on it. We rented that farm from 1940 to around 1955 or 56. The first big thing that happened to me was in 1944 in the spring when I was about 4 years old. And here's a photo of me. I'm not looking too great because I went through a trauma. One day it was spring house cleaning and my sister was chasing me around. She was 12 and I was 4. And my mother heard me screaming a lot and she got irritated and told my sister to stop screwing around with me. But I was in horrible pain in the stomach, and the next day they took me to the doctor in Pecatonica and he poked my side and said, oh, he's got a stomach flu or something, so go back home. Well, the next day I was unconscious, so they took me to Freeport, about 25 miles away. There was a big hospital there, and they were irritated with my parents. They said, he has appendicitis and is probably broken. So they took me in, did a 4-inch gash on my side, came back and said I had peritonitis, and the whole inside of me was infected, and they didn't know if I would live. A few days went by, and they said that things were getting worse, but one of the doctors called Chicago, and a doctor there said they had just gotten penicillin in, the wonder drug. He drove 90 miles back to Freeport with it, and they started giving it to me. And a few days later, they said that I was going to die, and a priest came in to give me last rites, even though we weren't Catholic, and he was shaking his beads and chanting away, and suddenly my eyes flew open, and I said, what's happening? It was a miracle. Was it the priest or was it the penicillin? So I was in a wheelchair for the next month as they wheeled me around the hospital, and I got to chat with everybody. And then I went home for 4 weeks, and there I stayed in bed, and then once I felt better, I was out and about, and it's like it never happened. Now, the next thing that happened to me was in 1946, and here I am on the cover of Life magazine. How did that happen? I started first grade, and a month later, a photographer and a person who was interviewing everybody, a reporter I guess, came to our school and said they were looking for the perfect one-room school. Ours was it, the Wagner one-room school, and our teacher, Miss Myers. They said they wanted to publish this worldwide so people could see what they were fighting for in World War II. Life magazine asked my parents if I could be on the cover, and they agreed, and I was not only on the cover, but in most of the 4-page spread in most of the pictures. I got 1,000 or more cards from all over the world. I got presents. I got wooden shoes from the Netherlands. And Franz Slow-Toed Everlow wrote to me. He was 7, I was 6. And guess what? 80 years later, we're still pen pals. It must be a record. Now, what was really humorous about the whole thing was my sister started high school when I went to first grade. She told me years later it was too bad she wasn't in 8th grade, because she would have pushed me aside and would have ended up on the cover of Life magazine and been famous, and she would have really enjoyed it. Like I was too young to really know what was going on. Such a nice sister. Here's a picture of my sister when she was 19 years old. Wasn't she nice looking? One day she came home and she had a young man with her, Ken, and he was handsome and nice as could be. And a few weeks later she came back home and asked me what I thought about him, and I said, you better grab him or else somebody else will, and that'll be the end of it. She agreed, and the next thing is she was engaged, and my mother was so happy. She got to do this wonderful wedding for her. It was in Brookville, which is a little village a few miles from our farm. Maybe 300 people lived there. A little white church with oak trees around it and a little creek running through it. And there's a picture of my cousin Randall and Nancy. Now Randall and I got to light the candles on both sides of the church and then on the altar. And then when my father brought my sister in, Nancy walked in front and took rose petals and threw them all around on the aisle. And then there was the most wonderful ceremony, and afterwards there was a sit-down dinner for 40 people. It was such a wonderful wedding, and my mother was so proud. Now here's a picture of my mother, one of the few that I have of her. What happened was really earth-shattering to me. I didn't realize that she had gone to the hospital and had surgery that was cancer. They took off her entire left breast. And I just was not kept informed by the family. They thought it was better. So she became so ill the last few months and ended up in bed at home in our television room. And I just couldn't stand it. I would walk by and I couldn't look. She suffocated from the cancer in her throat and passed away on Thanksgiving morning. My sister and I cried and cried, and then we said we were so glad that she passed away, and then we cried because we were glad she passed away. And to this day, 70 some years later, I still feel guilty. I didn't tell her I loved her enough. But life does go on. I did want to talk a little bit more about my mother. I always felt sorry for her. She was born in 1906 and went to 8 grades, but only read magazines and listened to the radio. She had no indoor plumbing, no water. The bathroom was an outhouse behind the house. She had to do all the housekeeping and also help my father out on the farm. She didn't have a vacuum cleaner until around 1947, 48 or so. The laundry was all done by hand, and it was just unbelievable. Now, what happened was unbelievable also. She designed the house that was rebuilt on the farm in Polo, Illinois. As a matter of fact, the house was so spectacular that Town and Country, a magazine, wanted to come out and do an overview of the house, also of her. But my parents said that they didn't think they should do that because the neighbors and our relatives would think we were uppity. How sad. All that work that she did all those years, And then suddenly she had a new house and only lived in it for 2 to 3 years before she passed away from cancer. The house was unbelievable. The bathroom was done in a pink or peach because in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, they had all these names for like avocado and peach and other colors. The bathroom was pink. The toilet, the bathtub, the sink, all in pink. The tiles were pink with white trim tiles. The kitchen was unbelievable. And the living room, that also, I just couldn't believe it. It was huge, and they had plastered the wall in a mint green, and the men took some kind of a board with indentations in it and pressed it into the wet plaster. And also there was a special carpet made of dark and light green swirled around, a fireplace, and all new furniture. And by the chairs were side tables, and on them were huge crystal ashtrays. They must have been 12 inches across, like something you'd have on your dining room table, and huge crystal lighters. But I don't think anybody ever smoked in there, but it was all show. As I said, they wanted to do a spread featuring my mother and the house that she designed, but it was not to be. I always felt sorry about that. I was on the cover of Life magazine in 1946, and all I could think of was around 1951 or 52, she could have been on the cover of Town and Country and had a full-page spread inside about the house, and what a fantastic job she did. I think that's where I got my ability to do artwork. My mother was very strong in that, even though she only had an eighth grade education. And I think I got my analytical skills from my father, because he only went to 8th grades also, but he was able to do computations of how many bushels there were in a container and how much it cost and all that sort of thing. So certainly a good way to grow up with a family that was in the know, even if they only had 8 grades educations. Now here's a picture of my father and myself. It's the only one I have of the two of us together. He became very mean after my mother passed away. I never did figure out what was going on with him. He took me to the 500-acre farm, sometimes at 3 or 4 in the morning to milk the cows, and then come back and milk the cows on the 160-acre farm, and then do farm work, and then go back and milk cows there, and then milk cows at the farm, 3 in the morning till 9 at night. I finally just gave in, and I couldn't do it anymore, and I told him that I refused to do it anymore, and there was a big trouble brewing, but eventually he just gave in, and I never went back to that 500-acre farm again. Just strange. Now it was 1956, I was 16, and my sister and her husband came to visit one Saturday, and my father said that he'd met a woman, Rose, and he was going to get married to her. Here's the picture of Rose. One day he said he was going to Wisconsin to see her and her daughter, who was a year older than I was, and I was in charge of the farm. That meant I had to milk the cows, clean out the barn, feed them, feed the pigs, the chickens, get the eggs, take care of the house, take care of everything else. I'm 16. Off he goes to Rice Lake, and I guess he must have got married there, and he came back home, and then he said that they were coming in her car with her daughter and the things that they thought they might need, because we had the new house and everything was nice as could be. And talk about lucky. My stepmother wanted a son since she had a daughter, so she took me in like I was her own child. She was the best thing that could have ever happened to me after my own mother had passed away. It's interesting as time goes by, you don't remember or forgot to ask how things happened. After I graduated from high school, I guess my stepmother Rose decided I should go to college for a year at least. So they sent me off to Rockford College, and I stayed with my sister and her husband. They had just bought a brand new ranch house on a double lot on a corner with 3 bedrooms in the best part of Rockford, Illinois. I had a great time that year. I studied art, history, French, and especially English, which would serve me the rest of my life. Unfortunately, I only went for a year, and then I ended up back on the farm again. I wasn't sure what was going to happen to me, and one day my father said, "Let's go to Forston, where his parents lived, my grandparents." We visited them and then went to the main drag of Forston. I think they had about 1,500 people that lived there. The main street had the bank that we went to, and it had a GMC and a Ford dealerships. And my father said, "Well, would you like to look at cars?" I said, "Oh." He assumed I was going to be on the farm the rest of my life now. So I decided, do I really want to have a Ford, or I want that Buick? I want that Buick. But I figured he'd never pay that price for the Buick. And I said, I guess I'll take the Ford. And he said, no, no, you need to take that Buick. I went, oh. I said, oh no. He said, oh yes. He said, because in the wintertime, we might have a foot of snow on the gravel road in front of the farm, and they haven't plowed it out yet, and then there'll be icy roads and things, and you need a big, heavy car, and you need to have that Buick because that will be able to keep you safe. And I thought to myself, what a deal. So the next thing is, I rode to town in the truck with my father, and I rode back to the farm in Polo in my brand new Buick 2-door hardtop. Such a deal. I was hot stuff. I drove all around Polo and everywhere else. I had a couple of girlfriends, and everybody thought, Chuck is a hot thing. And I said, that's right, don't forget it. I'd forgotten about having to be on the farm the rest of my life. But, time goes by and one never knows what's going to happen to one. Now it's 1959. I'd gotten out of college. I got my new Buick, and I figured I was going to be on the farm the rest of my life. Now, my stepmother, about a year before, had gotten up one morning and got all dressed up in a suit, nylons, high heels, a purse, hair all done. And I came down, and she said, I made breakfast and I'm leaving for the day. I said, well, where are you going? She said, I have a job in Freeport. I'm a secretary for a CEO. I said, how could this be? So off she went in her car, and my father and I were alone. I said, wow, I have a stepmother who works in town. How impressed am I? I was impressed. That was 1958. Now, 1959, after I had gotten out of college and had my new car, she came home one day from work and she sat me down in the kitchen and she said, I got you a job interview in Freeport. It's at a big manufacturing company. So go in there next week. I've set up an appointment and go talk to them. What was there to lose? Off I went to Freeport, was interviewed, and I came back home and nothing was said. This is around July. And a month went by and it was August and I was out in the cow barn by the side door shoveling cow manure. How exciting. And my stepmother yelled out the door, get in here now, you've got a phone call. And I went, yeah, whatever. Thought it was an aunt or somebody from Freeport. She said, get in here now. So off I ran into the house, after I took my boots off, of course, answered the phone, and the man said, remember me from a month ago? I said, yes, sir. Well, we want you to come in Monday. I said, Monday? He said, that's right. We want you to come in Monday and start your new job. Woo. So Rose and I are sitting at the table in the kitchen, 3 o'clock. My father comes in for afternoon tea and cookies before milking the cows. And he says, "What's up with you two? What's that look in your faces?" Well, my stepmother just shook her head and she says, "Chuck's starting a new job on Monday. He's going to go to work in his car and I'll go to work in my car and you'll be here alone." Ooh, my father just shook his head. So much for Chuck being on the farm the rest of his life. So off I went to Freeport, and they said, "Oh, you only have to come into work till Tuesday or so because we have something set up for you." I said, "Huh?" They said, "You go to the bus station. We have a place for you to stay with your car and park your car where it'll be safe. And then you get on the bus, you go to Chicago, and there you'll get picked up and taken to a big hotel downtown. And across the street in a high-rise office building, you'll learn how to run IBM tabulating machines by doing punch cards for data, wiring boards to program, sorters so that the data is put into sequence as it should be, and so on." So off to Chicago I went, and can you imagine, that was the beginning of my computer career, all because of my stepmother. I was in Freeport for about a year, and then I decided to move to Rockford, and I got a job there at a very great company, the latest equipment from IBM. I was excited. I had a wonderful apartment, my new car, of course, and my sister living there. So what could be better than that? I couldn't believe it. I had it made. I'm 23 years old now, and everything's perfect, and suddenly I got a letter in the mail, and I opened it up. It said, "From the government." Huh, I wonder what this is. Should I throw it away? You've been drafted. Drafted. So the next thing is, I go to Chicago, I get on a bus, and they're driving me and a bunch of other young men to Fort Benning, Georgia, to train in the Army, basic training. And I thought to myself, this is gonna be great. Well, actually it did work out just great. And in the end, instead of becoming a lieutenant, which they wanted to be, or learning to fight in the swamp, they sent me to San Francisco to work in the computer center. I got to San Francisco, got off the bus from downtown after flying in on United, looked at the city, looked at the bay, kissed the ground and said, "I'm never leaving San Francisco or California." And that, my friends, is the end of part 1. Eventually, I'll be working on part 2, starting with being in the Army at the Presidio and working on huge computer centers and consulting on corporations all around the Bay Area, and ending up retiring at 62, but still in the computer business. Now, when I'm 86 years old, that's 63 years in the computer industry, all because of my stepmother, Rose. I love her.